She was only 7 years old when she promised to change to lives forever. Standing barefoot outside a luxury hotel, clutching a crumpled dollar bill, she looked up at a man who could buy anything he wanted. Her words were simple, innocent, and heartbreaking. She promised to repay him when she grew up. Most people would have walked past. Most people did, but this wasn't just about a hungry child asking for help. This was about a little girl who had already learned that her worth was measured differently from others. That her skin color meant some doors would always be closed. That even her desperate need for necessities would be met with suspicion, rejection, and cold indifference. The wealthy businessman stood at a crossroads that day. He could choose compassion or convenience, kindness or conformity. What he decided to do next would ripple through decades, challenging everything both believed about justice, privilege, and the power of human connection. But here's what nobody expected, including the little girl herself. Her simple promise would eventually expose a powerful and undeniable truth that would force an entire community to confront its deepest prejudices. What happened when that promise came due 20 years later? The answer will leave you questioning everything you think you know about second chances and the cost of doing what's right. Her name was Zara Williams, and at 7 years old, she had already mastered the art of making something out of nothing. Every morning, she would carefully fold the worn blanket that served as her bed in the back corner of her grandmother's cramped apartment. The building sat in the forgotten part of downtown, where gentrification had painted fresh murals on brick walls but left the people inside struggling with the same old problems. Zara's world was small but full of love. Her grandmother, Mama Rose, worked double shifts at a downtown hotel, cleaning rooms for guests who spent more on a single night than they saw in a month. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Rose scrubbed marble bathrooms and penthouses. At the same time, her granddaughter went to bed hungry more often than not, but Zara was different. Even at 7, she possessed an unusual combination of wisdom and hope that surprised everyone she met. While other children her age played with toys, she collected bottle caps. She created elaborate games, turning their tiny apartment into kingdoms and adventures. She had learned to read by studying discarded newspapers in the lobby, sounding out words with the determination of someone who understood that knowledge was the only ladder out of their situation. The neighborhood around them was changing fast. New coffee shops appeared overnight, charging $5 for drinks Zara had never heard of. Shiny cars with tinted windows cruised streets where she used to play freely, their occupants staring out with curiosity and discomfort. The corner store where Mama Rose had bought groceries for 15 years suddenly started following them around, watching their every move as if poverty was contagious. Zara noticed everything. She saw how people's faces changed when they looked at her and her grandmother, how conversations stopped when they walked by. Even simple interactions, buying milk, asking for directions, became loaded with tension and unspoken judgments. But she also noticed something else. The massive hotel where her grandmother worked, towering over their neighborhood like a gleaming monument to everything they couldn't have. That hotel became her fascination. The Grand View Towers, 37. Marble floors, crystal, and exclusivity floors. Every day after school, Zara would walk past the entrance, watching wealthy guests glide in and out of luxury cars. Men in $1,000 suits checked their phones while doorkeepers rushed to accommodate their every need. Women in designer dresses swept through the lobby as if they owned the air they breathed. The contrast was stark and painful. Just 4 blocks away, Zara's building had broken elevators, flickering lights, and heat that worked only when it wanted to. But somehow, watching that hotel didn't make her bitter, it made her dream. She would imagine herself walking through those glass doors not as her grandmother's guest, but as someone who belonged there. The dream became more urgent as their situation grew desperate. Mama Rosa's hours had been cut at the hotel, something about restructuring and budget constraints, corporate speak that translated to choosing between rent and food. Zara understood the weight of adult problems in a way no child should. She saw her grandmother's shoulders sag a little more each day, watched her count and recount the few crumpled bills in her purse. That's when Zara made a decision that would change everything. She had been saving pennies, nickels, and dimes for months' money found under couch cushions, returned from forgotten vending machine purchases, earned by returning bottles to the corner store. Her collection totaled exactly $3.47. Not much by anyone's standards, but to Zara it represented possibility. She had a plan forming in her 7-year-old mind. A strategy that involved the one place in their neighborhood where people had everything they needed, a plan that required more courage than most adults possessed. She didn't know about economics, social barriers, or the complex dynamics of race and class. She only knew that good people helped each other, and surely, among all those wealthy hotel guests, there had to be at least one good person. Zara didn't understand yet that her innocent faith and human kindness was about to collide with a reality that would test everything she believed about fairness, dignity, and the true meaning of promise-keeping. The stage was set for an encounter that would challenge her worldview and the conscience of everyone who witnessed what happened next. The morning she decided to act, Zara had no idea she was about to step into a story much bigger than herself. That Tuesday morning started like any other, but Zara felt different. She had made her decision during the long, sleepless night, listening to her grandmother's quiet sobs through the thin apartment walls. The eviction notice had arrived yesterday, 30 days to find money they didn't have or lose the only home Zara had ever known. She dressed carefully in her cleanest school clothes, a faded pink dress Mama Rose had bought from the thrift store. Last Christmas, she carried her life savings in her small backpack, $3.47 in coins that clinked softly with each step. Her plan was simple. Only a child could walk to the fancy hotel, find someone who looked kind and wealthy, and ask for help with a promise to repay them when she grew up. The morning air was crisp as she approached the Grandview Towers. With each block, the neighborhood transformed. Cracked sidewalks gave way to pristine concrete. Boarded-up storefronts became gleaming boutiques with prices in the windows that made her dizzy, and the people changed, too. The familiar faces of her community, tired but warm, struggling but supportive, disappeared, replaced by strangers who looked right through her as if she were invisible. When she reached the hotel's marble steps, her confidence had started to waver. The building seemed even more imposing, its glass facade reflecting the morning sun like armor. Uniformed doorkeepers stood at attention, their eyes scanning the street with practiced efficiency. She watched for 20 minutes, studying the rhythm of the place, learning who belonged and who didn't. The guests were easy to identify. They emerged from black cars and yellow taxis with an effortless grace that spoke of privilege. Designer handbags, polished shoes, and clothes probably cost more than her grandmother made in a month. They moved through the world as if it had been constructed specifically for their comfort, and perhaps it had. Zara's first attempt was a disaster. She approached a woman in a fur coat who was checking her phone while waiting for her car. The woman looked down at Zara with a startled expression, reserved for finding an insect in her soup. Before Zara could speak, the woman had signaled to the doorman, who quickly stepped between them. "Miss, this child doesn't belong here," the doorman said firmly, his hand gently but insistently guiding Zara away from the entrance. "You need to move along." The rejection stung, but Zara had expected it. She retreated to the corner, regrouping. Maybe she had chosen the wrong person. Perhaps she may need to be smarter about her approach. She spent another hour observing, looking for someone who seemed different, someone whose eyes held kindness instead of indifference. That's when she saw him. Marcus Whitfield stepped out of a silver Mercedes, and something about him caught Zara's attention immediately. Unlike the other hotel guests who moved with calculated precision, he paused on the sidewalk, looking around at his surroundings. He was younger than most other wealthy visitors, maybe in his 30s, wearing an expensive suit but carrying himself with less rigid formality. More importantly, Marcus didn't immediately turn away when a homeless veteran approached him near The hotel entrance, he stopped, reached into his wallet, and handed the man a $20 bill and a genuine conversation. The interaction lasted only a minute, but told Zara everything she needed to know. This was her chance. After his phone call, she waited until Marcus returned to the hotel entrance, then stepped into his path. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she looked up at him, this tall, well-dressed man who represented everything she and her grandmother needed but couldn't have. "Excuse me, sir," she began, her voice smaller than intended. "I need to ask you something important, asterisk." Marcus stopped, genuinely surprised to find a young girl addressing him directly. His first instinct was to look around for her parents. Still, seeing none, he knelt to her. I level a gesture that immediately set him apart from everyone else Zara had encountered that morning. "I need to borrow some money," Zara continued, the words rushing out before her courage could abandon her. "Not for toys or candy or anything like that. My grandmama and me, we're gonna lose our home if we can't pay rent. She works really hard. But it's not enough, and I know you have lots of money because you stay at this fancy hotel." Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from surprise to something more profound, recognition, perhaps, or concern. But Zara wasn't finished. "I can't pay you back right now because I'm only 7 and I don't have a job yet. But I promise, I swear on everything I love, that when I grow up and get rich, I'll find you and pay you back with interest. I don't even know what interest is exactly, but my grandmama says that's what you're supposed to pay when someone helps you out." The sincerity in her voice was devastating. Here was a child who had already learned that her worth would be questioned, her needs dismissed, her very presence seen as an inconvenience. Yet she stood there with a dignity that would have impressed kings, offering a contract based on nothing but faith and determination. But before Marcus could respond, the hotel's head of security had spotted the interaction. David Morrison was a man whose job depended on keeping undesirables away from the hotel's wealthy clientele. He had been watching Zara for over an hour, and her persistence had crossed the line from harmless to problematic. "Sir, I apologize for this interruption," Morrison said, appearing beside them with the smooth efficiency of someone trained to handle delicate situations. "This child has been loitering around the property all morning, bothering our guests. We'll have her removed immediately." The dismissal was swift and humiliating. Morrison's tone suggested that Zara's presence was an affront to the hotel's standards, a problem to be solved rather than a human being to be heard. He placed his hand on Zara's shoulder, not roughly, but with the explicit intention of escorting her away from Marcus and off the property. "Wait," Marcus said, standing up. Something in his voice made Morrison pause. "She wasn't bothering me. We were having a conversation." But Morrison had protocols to follow, and a 7-year-old black girl asking wealthy white guests for money was precisely the kind of situation he was paid to prevent. "Mr. Whitfield, I understand your concern, but we can't allow solicitation on hotel property. It creates liability issues and makes our other guests uncomfortable." The words hung in the air like poison. "Other guests are uncomfortable." The implication was clear. Zara's presence, need, and existence in this space were inherently problematic. She wasn't being removed for what she had done, but for who she was and where she had dared to ask for help. Marcus looked down at Zara, who had gone very still. Her 7-year-old mind was processing a lesson that would shape her understanding of the world for decades. She was learning that there were places she didn't belong, people she wasn't supposed to approach, and dreams she wasn't allowed to voice. The moment stretched between them, this wealthy businessman, this determined child, and this security guard who represented all the invisible barriers that kept their worlds separate. What happened next would determine whether Zara's faith in human kindness survived this encounter, or whether she would learn that some promises were too dangerous to make. Some help was too much to ask for. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. His movement deliberate and decisive, but what he pulled out wasn't what anyone expected. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, and what he pulled out wasn't his wallet, it was his business card. But Morrison's radio crackled to life before he could hand it to Zara. The hotel manager's voice cut through the morning air with razor-sharp authority. Security to main entrance. We have a situation that needs immediate resolution. The situation wasn't Zara asking for help. The problem was that other guests had started to notice. A crowd had begun to form, not of supporters, but of observers whose discomfort was palpable. Wealthy patrons whispered among themselves, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disgust. Some pulled out their phones, not to help, but to document what they saw as an inappropriate spectacle. "You see what's happening here?" Morrison said to Marcus, gesturing toward the growing audience. "This is exactly what we try to prevent. These people," he paused, the weight of those two words carrying decades of prejudice. "They come here looking for handouts, and it creates a scene that drives away legitimate guests." Zara felt the shift in the air around her. The morning sun seemed colder. The marble steps beneath her feet felt less solid. She wasn't just being rejected, but made into an example. Her desperate attempt to save her home had transformed her into a problem to be solved, a disturbance to be removed, but Marcus surprised everyone, including himself. "What's your name?" he asked Zara, ignoring Morrison entirely. "Zara Williams," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the gathering crowd. Double quotes. "Well, Zara Williams," Marcus said, kneeling again so they were eye to eye, "I want to hear more about this promise of yours." Morrison's frustration was becoming visible. "Mr. Whitfield, I really must insist." "You must insist on what?" Marcus stood up, his voice carrying a new edge. "That I can't have a conversation with a child, that there's something wrong with listening to someone who needs help." The confrontation escalated in ways that made everyone uncomfortable for different reasons. The hotel guests weren't upset about injustice, they were upset about inconvenience. Their morning routine had been disrupted by the messy reality of poverty intersecting with their privileged space. A woman in pearls actually approached the manager. "This is unacceptable," she declared loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We pay premium prices to stay here, and we shouldn't have to deal with this sort of thing. Not a child in need, not a human being asking for help. A thing to be managed, removed, forgotten." Zara felt the weight of every stare, every whisper, every uncomfortable shuffle of expensive shoes on marble. She realized with devastating clarity that her presence wasn't just unwelcome, it was seen as contamination. These people looked at her like she carried something contagious, something that might rub off on their clean, ordered world, but the worst part wasn't their disgust. The worst part was their indifference to her desperation. She had laid her heart bare, offered her future as collateral, promised everything she might ever become in exchange for the chance to keep her home. And to them, it was nothing more than an inconvenience to be eliminated. Morrison made his decision. "I'm calling the police," he announced, reaching for his radio. "We have a minor on the property without supervision, potentially running some kind of scam." The word scam hit Zara like a physical blow. Her honest plea for help, her sincere promise to repay, had been twisted into something criminal. At 7 years old, she was learning that her word, her integrity, her desperate need, none of it mattered. What mattered was that she didn't belong, and her insistence on being heard was being treated as a crime. Marcus watched this unfold with growing horror. He saw a system designed to protect comfort by eliminating anything that challenged it. He saw how quickly desperation could be reframed as deception, how a child's promise could be dismissed as manipulation. More importantly, he recognized something in Zara's eyes that he remembered from his childhood, the exact moment when innocence dies and harsh reality takes place. The moment when a child realizes that the world is not fair, that kindness is not guaranteed, and that sometimes good people do nothing while bad things happen. The police sirens were already audible in the distance. Someone called them about A 7-year-old girl whose only crime was asking for help in the wrong zip code, but as those sirens grew louder, Marcus decided to ripple through both their lives in ways neither could imagine. He looked at Zara, then at the crowd of uncomfortable faces, then at Morrison with his radio protocols and absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing. "Zara," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos around them, "I accept your promise." The words stopped everything. The whispers ceased, Morrison's radio went silent. Even the approaching sirens seemed to fade as the weight of that simple statement settled over the crowd, but accepting her promise was just the beginning of what Marcus would do. Marcus didn't just accept Zara's promise, he honored it in a way that shocked everyone present. He pulled out his checkbook on the marble steps in front of the uncomfortable crowd, the frustrated security guard, and the approaching police officers. But he didn't write a check for $20 or even $100. He wrote a check for $3,000, enough to cover Zara's rent for 6 months. "This is a loan," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "A business transaction with terms we both agree to. Zara has offered to repay me when she's older with interest. I'm documenting this agreement, and I expect full repayment in 20 years. The crowd didn't know how to react. Morrison lowered his radio, confused by this turn of events. The police officers, arriving to remove a problem child, instead found a legitimate business meeting between a respected hotel guest and a young entrepreneur. But Marcus wasn't finished. He knelt beside Zara again, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "I need you to remember something important. This isn't charity, and it's not because I pity you. This is an investment in your future because I believe in your promise. But more than that, I need you to remember that what happened here today wasn't about you not belonging. It was about other people being uncomfortable with change." 20 years later, the promise came due in a way no one could have predicted. Dr. Zara Williams, now a pediatric surgeon who had worked her way through medical school, found Marcus Whitfield in the same hotel where they had first met. But this time, she walked through those glass doors with confidence earned through decades of fighting for her place in rooms where she wasn't expected to belong. She carried a cashier's check for $15,000, the original loan plus compound interest calculated to the penny, but she also took something else, the deed to a community center she had built in her old neighborhood, funded by her success and dedicated to children who needed someone to believe in their promises. The repayment ceremony was small and private, but its impact rippled far beyond that hotel lobby. Marcus, now in his 50s and even more successful, was speechless when Zara explained what his belief in her had created. Not just her medical career, but also the dozens of children she had mentored, the scholarships she had funded, and the community programs she had established. "You taught me that a promise is sacred," she told him. "But more importantly, you taught me that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is treat someone with basic human dignity when the world expects you to look away." The story spread because Zara made sure it did. She shared it at medical conferences, community meetings, and eventually in a best-selling book. But she didn't share it as a feel-good story about one generous man. She shared it as a mirror, reflecting all the times people had the opportunity to help and chose comfort instead, because for every Marcus who stopped to listen, dozens walked past. For every moment of kindness that changed a life, countless moments of indifference perpetuated cycles of poverty and exclusion. Zara's story wasn't just about what happened when someone said yes, it was about examining all the times society says no. The community center Zara built sits for blocks from that luxury hotel, and the contrast is intentional. Children who look like 7-year-old Zara walk past those same marble steps every day. Some of them stop, just as she did, looking up at a world that seems impossibly distant from their reality. But now they have somewhere to go where their dreams are taken seriously, their promises are valued, and they learn that their zip code or bank account doesn't determine their worth. The real power of Zara's story isn't in the happy ending, it's in the uncomfortable questions it raises. How many other 7-year-olds have stood on marble steps with nothing but hope and been turned away? How many promises have been dismissed as scams? How many potential doctors, teachers, engineers, and leaders have learned early that their dreams don't matter? The hotel still operates as it did 20 years ago, the same marble steps, glass doors, and protocols designed to keep certain people out. But now there's a small plaque near the entrance, placed there by Marcus himself. It reads simply, "Every child deserves to have their promise heard." Some guests stop to read it. Most walk past without noticing. The choice, as always, is theirs, but here's what Zara wants everyone to understand. The 7-year-old version of herself is still out there. She's standing on steps across America, holding on to promises that could change the world if someone would stop long enough to listen. She's in your neighborhood, city, and community, waiting for someone to see her potential instead of her problems. The question isn't whether these children exist, they do. The question isn't whether their promises have value, they do. The question is more straightforward and more challenging than that. When you encounter them, will you be Marcus or will you be everyone else who walked away? Because the next time you see a child with nothing but hope and determination, remember, you might be holding the key to a promise that could change everything.